I was standing at my kitchen window drinking my morning coffee when I saw 3 pickup trucks pulling surveying equipment onto the protected wetland behind my property. And my blood ran cold because I knew exactly who sent them. The conservation easement on that land had been the entire reason. I bought this house in Boulder Creek, Colorado, 5 years ago. 20 acres of pristine wetland habitat, legally protected in perpetuity, home to sandhill cranes, several endangered plant species, and a healthy population of chorus frogs whose evening songs had become my favorite soundtrack. The easement meant no one could ever build on it, ever develop it, ever touch it. That land would remain wild forever, or so I thought. I set my coffee down so hard it sloshed onto the counter and grabbed my phone, zooming in to take photos through the window. 3 men in high-visibility vests were setting up surveying equipment, orange stakes already dotting the soggy ground near the creek bed. One of them was photographing the terrain with what looked like professional camera equipment. Another was taking measurements with some kind of laser device. This was not casual observation. This was planning. My name is Lancaster, and I have dealt with some infuriating things from the Pinecrest Hills Homeowners Association over the past 5 years, but this crossed a line I did not even know existed. They had fined me for my mailbox being the wrong shade of black. They had sent me violation notices because my grass was a 1/4 inch too long during a drought when watering restrictions were in place. They had threatened to put a lien on my house because I planted native wildflowers instead of the approved grass blend in my front yard. But attempting to develop protected conservation land, that was not just annoying, that was criminal. I pulled on my boots and headed outside, my heart pounding. The morning air was crisp and cold, typical for early March in the Colorado foothills. I could see my breath as I walked quickly across my back lawn toward the property line, where a simple split rail fence separated my yard from the conservation easement. The fence was purely decorative, marking the boundary more than preventing access, but that boundary was legally significant. "Hey," I called out as I reached the fence. "What are you doing out there?" The 3 men looked up. The closest one, a stocky guy with a graying beard, waved dismissively. "Private survey, property assessment." "That is conservation land," I said, climbing over the fence. My boots sank into the soft earth immediately. The ground here was always wet, fed by an underground spring and the creek that ran through the center of the acreage. You cannot build on it. There is a permanent easement. The bearded man exchanged glances with his colleagues. "We have permission from the property owner." "The property owner agreed to a conservation easement," I said, pulling out my phone. "I have the documentation. That land cannot be developed. Who hired you?" "Look, buddy, we are just doing our job," the bearded man said, his tone hardening. "You have a problem, take it up with whoever you need to take it up with. We were hired to survey this parcel for potential development, and that is what we are doing." "By who?" I demanded. He shrugged. "Our client requested confidentiality." I took more photos, making sure to capture their faces, their equipment, the company name on the truck doors. Morrison Land Surveying out of Denver. Then I photographed the orange stakes they had placed, noting how they formed a rough perimeter that would encompass at least 5 acres of the wetland, including the most ecologically sensitive areas near the creek. "This is illegal," I said firmly. "I am documenting everything, and I will be reporting this." "Report whatever you want," the bearded man said, turning back to his equipment. "We have our permits." "Permits?" I almost laughed. "You cannot get permits to develop conservation easement land." "That is the entire point of a conservation easement." He did not respond, just went back to work as if I had not spoken. The other 2 men did the same, pointedly ignoring me. I stood there for another minute, taking more photos and a video that captured the full scope of what they were doing, then headed back to my house. My hands were shaking, but not from the cold. This was big. This was serious. And I had a terrible suspicion I knew exactly who was behind it. Back inside, I went straight to my home office and pulled out the thick folder I kept with all my property documents. The conservation easement was right on top, because I had referenced it so many times when arguing with the HOA about various issues. The document was crystal clear. The 20 acres of wetland adjacent to my property and several other homes in Pinecrest Hills was held in perpetuity by the Colorado Conservation Trust, with strict protections preventing any development, alteration of water flow, removal of native vegetation, or disturbance of wildlife habitat. The original property owner had placed the easement voluntarily 30 years ago, and it ran with the land forever. It could not be undone, could not be bought out, could not be modified without the consent of the Conservation Trust, and even then only under extremely limited circumstances that would never include development. I scanned the document and several related pages, then drafted an email to the Colorado Conservation Trust. I attached my photos and video from this morning and explained what I had witnessed. I marked it urgent and hit send. Then I called the non-emergency line for the Boulder Creek Sheriff's Office. "Sheriff's Office, how can I help you?" a woman's voice answered. "Hi, my name is Lancaster, and I live in Pinecrest Hills. I just witnessed surveyors on conservation easement land behind my property, apparently preparing for development, which would be a violation of the easement terms. I am not sure if this is a criminal matter or not, but I wanted to report it." "Conservation easement land," she repeated. "Like protected wetlands." "Exactly. The Colorado Conservation Trust holds the easement. It cannot be developed, but someone hired Morrison Land Surveying out of Denver to do a full survey with what looks like development planning." "Hold on, let me transfer you to a deputy who can take your report." The hold music was mercifully brief. A man's voice came on. "This is Deputy Martinez. You are reporting suspicious activity on conservation land." I explained everything again, including the details about the easement and my suspicion that my HOA might be involved. Deputy Martinez took down all my information and said he would send someone out to check the situation and get a copy of my documentation. "If someone is actually trying to develop protected land," he said, "that is definitely something we need to look into. There are state and federal laws about wetlands, not just the easement issue." "That is what I thought," I said. "Thank you." After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and stared at my computer screen. My email to the Conservation Trust sat in my sent folder. I had done what I could for the moment. Now I needed to figure out who was behind this and why. The answer came knocking on my door 2 hours later. I looked through the peephole and groaned. Barbara Whitmore, president of the Pinecrest Hills HOA, stood on my front porch with her signature tight-lipped expression and a folder under her arm. Barbara was in her late 50s, with severely cut blonde hair, a wardrobe that consisted entirely of beige and cream-colored blazers, and the kind of pursed-mouth disapproval that could wilt flowers at 20 paces. She had been HOA president for 8 years and treated the position like she was governing a small nation rather than a neighborhood of 43 houses. I opened the door but did not invite her in. "Barbara." "Lucas," she said crisply, "I understand you harassed a surveying crew this morning." "I did not harass anyone," I said. "I asked them what they were doing on protected conservation land." The HOA has retained Morrison Land Surveying to assess development potential for the wetland parcel adjacent to our community, Barbara said, as if this was perfectly reasonable. Your interference was inappropriate and unwelcome. I stared at her. Development potential. Barbara, that land has a permanent conservation easement. There is no development potential. You cannot build on it. The HOA board has been in consultation with our attorney, Barbara said, opening her folder and pulling out a document. We believe there are legal avenues to challenge or modify the easement. The land in question would be ideal for a community recreation center, which would significantly increase property values for all residents. You cannot challenge a conservation easement just because you want the land, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. That is not how it works. The easement exists to protect the wetlands and the habitat. It is legally binding, permanently. Our attorney disagrees, Barbara said, and as HOA president, I am required to pursue opportunities that benefit the community as a whole. A recreation center with tennis courts, a pool and meeting space would be a significant amenity. On wetlands, I said flatly, you want to destroy protected wetlands to build tennis courts. I want to develop unused land to benefit homeowners, Barbara corrected. The so-called wetlands are essentially a swamp that breeds mosquitoes and attracts wildlife that cause property damage. It is a legally protected habitat, I said, and I have already reported this to the Colorado Conservation Trust and the Sheriff's Office. What you are planning is illegal, Barbara. Her expression hardened. Your pattern of obstructionism regarding HOA initiatives is well documented, Lucas. This is simply one more example. The board will be voting on whether to pursue legal action against you for interference with HOA business. Legal action? I almost laughed. You are the ones breaking the law. We will see what the courts say about that, Barbara said. She handed me a paper from her folder. This is a formal warning regarding your disruption of the surveying crew. Further interference will result in fines and potential legal action. I took the paper, crumpled it into a ball, and dropped it on my porch. Get off my property, Barbara. Her eyes narrowed. Your attitude is exactly why this community has problems. No, Barbara. People like you who think rules do not apply to you are why this community has problems. That conservation easement exists for a reason. It is not your land to develop. It is not the HOA's land to develop, and no amount of lawyering is going to change that. We will see, she repeated, then turned and walked back to her silver Lexus parked in my driveway. I watched her drive away, then picked up the crumpled warning notice and went back inside. My hands were shaking again, but this time it was pure anger. Barbara and the HOA board were really going to try to destroy protected wetlands for a recreation center. The audacity was breathtaking. The stupidity was even more stunning. I spent the rest of the day researching. I pulled up everything I could find about conservation easements, legal challenges to them, and the specific protections for wetlands in Colorado. The more I read, the more certain I became that what the HOA was attempting was not just unethical but illegal on multiple fronts. Conservation easements were notoriously difficult to break or modify, precisely because they were designed to protect land in perpetuity. Courts generally upheld them even when substantial money was at stake. And Colorado had strict laws protecting wetlands, with both state and federal regulations that would apply to any development attempt. But I also found something troubling. A handful of cases where developers or other entities had managed to tie up conservation easements in court for years, effectively preventing the land from being used or enjoyed even if they ultimately lost. The legal process itself became a weapon. Was that what Barbara and the HOA were planning? Even if they knew they would lose eventually, were they going to make it so expensive and time-consuming that the Conservation Trust would be forced to negotiate some kind of compromise? My email dinged. The Colorado Conservation Trust had responded. Mr. Lancaster, thank you for your urgent report. We were not aware of any surveying activity on the Pinecrest Hills wetland easement. This is extremely concerning. Our legal team is reviewing the situation, and we will be contacting the HOA immediately to demand they cease all activity on the protected land. We may need to speak with you further and may request copies of your photographic evidence. We take violations of our easements very seriously. Thank you for your vigilance. Regards, Jennifer Foster, Conservation Trust Legal Department. I felt a small surge of relief. At least the Conservation Trust was taking this seriously. They had resources, lawyers, and experience dealing with exactly this kind of situation. I was not alone in this fight. The next morning, I woke to the sound of heavy machinery. I jumped out of bed and ran to the back window. A small excavator was parked at the edge of the wetland, and the surveying crew was back, now joined by what looked like a construction foreman and 2 additional workers. They appeared to be preparing to clear vegetation. I did not bother getting dressed beyond throwing on jeans and a sweatshirt. I grabbed my phone and ran outside, not even bothering with shoes, my feet hitting the cold ground as I sprinted across my lawn. "Stop!" I shouted. "Stop right now!" The excavator's engine was idling but not yet moving. The operator looked down at me from the cab. The foreman, a tall man in a hard hat, turned around. "You need to back up, sir," the foreman said. "This is a work site." "This is protected conservation land," I said, holding up my phone and taking photos. "You cannot work here. There is a permanent easement preventing any development or disturbance." "We have permits," the foreman said, pulling a folded document from his jacket pocket. "Issued by Boulder County." "Let me see that," I demanded. He hesitated, then handed it over. I unfolded it and scanned quickly. It was a grading and excavation permit for site preparation and drainage improvement on the parcel that included the wetland. The permit was dated 3 days ago and listed the applicant as Pinecrest Hills Homeowners Association. "This is fraudulent," I said. "This land has a conservation easement. The county should not have issued this permit." "Take it up with the county," the foreman said, reaching for the permit. "We have authorization to proceed." "No," I said, stepping back and holding the permit away from him. "This is evidence of fraud. I am keeping it." "Sir, you need to return that permit right now," the foreman said, his voice hardening. "No," I repeated. "You are not doing any work here today. The Colorado Conservation Trust has been notified and they are taking legal action. The sheriff's office has been notified. If you do any work on this land, you will be participating in a crime." The foreman looked uncertain for the first time. He pulled out his phone. "I need to call my boss." "You do that," I said. "In the meantime, nobody touches anything." I stood there in my bare feet in the cold mud, holding the permit, while the foreman walked away to make his call. The excavator operator shut off the engine. The other workers stood around looking confused. Several of my neighbors had come out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. I recognized Tom and Sarah Chen from 2 houses down, both in their bathrobes. Margaret Hendricks, an elderly woman who lived directly next to me, was standing on her back deck with her arms crossed. "Lucas, what is going on?" Tom called out. "The HOA is trying to develop the conservation land," I called back. "Illegally." "They can't do that," Sarah said, walking toward the fence line. "That land is protected." "I know," I said. "I am trying to stop them." The foreman came back, his expression grim. "My boss says to pack it up." We are not starting work until this gets sorted out. Relief flooded through me. Smart choice. This is going to cost somebody a lot of money, the foreman said. Mobilization fees, equipment rental, crew time. If your HOA hired us under false pretenses, they are going to have a major bill. Send it to Barbara Whitmore, I said. She is the HOA president. It took 20 minutes for the crew to pack up their equipment and leave. By then, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered, all asking questions. I explained what I knew, showed them the photos on my phone, and let them look at the permit I had confiscated. I cannot believe Barbara would try something like this, Margaret said. She was 83 and had lived in Pinecrest Hills since the neighborhood was built. That wetland has been protected since before these houses existed. I can believe it, Tom said darkly. The HOA has been getting more aggressive every year. Remember when they tried to ban vegetable gardens? And when they wanted to require approval for any car parked in a driveway overnight, Sarah added. Like we all have to keep our cars in the garage like we are hiding them. We talked for a while longer, and I promised to keep everyone updated. Several neighbors asked if there was anything they could do to help, and I suggested they might want to attend the next HOA board meeting to voice their opposition to this development plan. Back inside my house, I photographed the permit from every angle, then scanned it and sent copies to both the Colorado Conservation Trust and Deputy Martinez at the sheriff's office. Then, I started researching Boulder County's permitting process. What I found made my stomach sink. The county had an online portal where permit applications could be tracked. I searched for the address of the wetland parcel and found the permit that had been issued 3 days ago. But I also found something else. An application for a much larger development permit, filed by the Pinecrest Hills HOA just last week, requesting permission to build a 12,000-square-foot recreation center with associated parking, tennis courts, and a pool on the wetland parcel. The application was still under review, but someone at the county had already flagged it with a note. Applicant needs to provide documentation regarding conservation easement status before this application can proceed. So the HOA had applied for the big permit, been asked about the easement, and then somehow gotten a smaller permit approved for site preparation without resolving the easement question. That smelled like fraud, or at minimum, severe negligence by the county permitting office. I took screenshots of everything and added them to my growing evidence file. My phone rang. It was a number I did not recognize with a Denver area code. "Hello, Mr. Lancaster. This is Jennifer Foster from the Colorado Conservation Trust. Do you have a few minutes to talk?" "Absolutely," I said. "I have been reviewing the situation with our legal team," Jennifer said. "What the HOA is attempting is extremely serious. We have sent them a cease and desist letter, and we are preparing to file for an emergency injunction to prevent any work on the easement land. But I wanted to talk to you about what you witnessed." I walked her through everything, from the initial surveying crew to this morning's near-construction start. I told her about the permit I had confiscated and sent her a copy of it via email while we talked. "This is very helpful," Jennifer said. "The fact that they obtained a county permit is particularly concerning because it suggests they misrepresented the easement status to the county. That is fraud." "That is what I thought," I said. "We are going to move quickly on this," Jennifer said. "I want you to know that the Conservation Trust has substantial experience with easement violations, and we have never lost a case. The law is very clear. That easement is permanent and binding. The HOA has no legal pathway to develop that land." "So why are they trying?" I asked. "Usually it is ignorance or wishful thinking," Jennifer said. Sometimes people do not understand how conservation easements work and think they can just buy their way out of them or find a loophole. Sometimes they get bad legal advice. And sometimes they are just arrogant enough to think the rules do not apply to them. That sounds like Barbara Whitmore, I said. Jennifer laughed. Well, she is about to learn a very expensive lesson. Violating a conservation easement can result in substantial penalties, and if they actually did any work on the land, they would be liable for restoration costs, which can run into hundreds of thousands of dollars for wetland habitat. They did not do any work yet, I said. I stopped them this morning before they could start. Good, Jennifer said. That may have saved everyone a lot of trouble. We will be in touch, Mr. Lancaster, and thank you again for your vigilance. People like you who actually care about these protections are why we can do our job. After we hung up, I felt better than I had in 2 days. The Conservation Trust was on it. They had lawyers, resources, and a perfect track record. Barbara and the HOA board had badly miscalculated, but I underestimated just how badly Barbara would react to being told no. That afternoon, I got an email from the Pinecrest Hills HOA with the subject line Urgent, Special Assessment and Emergency Meeting. I opened it with a sense of dread. Dear homeowners, due to unexpected legal challenges and associated costs, the HOA board has approved a special assessment of $5,000 per household to cover legal fees related to the Community Recreation Center project. This assessment is due within 30 days. Additionally, there will be an emergency meeting of the HOA board this Thursday, March 13th at 7 p.m. at the community clubhouse to discuss ongoing matters. Homeowner attendance is encouraged but not required. Regards, Barbara Whitmore, HOA President. $5,000. She was trying to make every homeowner in Pinecrest Hills pay for her illegal development scheme. I called Tom Chen immediately. Did you see the email? I asked. I am looking at it right now, Tom said. This is insane. $5,000. For what? For Barbara's lawyers to fight the conservation easement, I said. She is trying to make us all pay for her illegal project. Can she do that? Tom asked. Just charge us $5,000. The HOA bylaws probably allow special assessments for certain things, I said. But I am betting this is not a legal use of that power. We need to get homeowners organized for that meeting on Thursday. I am on it, Tom said. Sarah and I know most of the neighbors. We will start making calls. Over the next 2 days, Tom and Sarah worked their network while I compiled a presentation about the conservation easement, the legal protections for the wetland, and the HOA's illegal activity. I printed out copies of all my evidence, including the photos, the fraudulent permit, the documentation about the easement, and emails from the Conservation Trust. Thursday evening arrived cold and clear. The Pinecrest Hills Community Clubhouse was a modest building near the neighborhood entrance, usually used for the occasional birthday party or baby shower. By the time I arrived at 6:45 p.m., the parking lot was already full. I had to park on the street and walk back. Inside, the main room was packed. Folding chairs had been set up facing a table at the front where Barbara Whitmore sat with the 4 other HOA board members. Dennis Morrison, a retired engineer, Patricia Grant, a real estate agent, Kevin Walsh, who worked in finance, and Linda Foster, a teacher. All 5 of them looked uncomfortable as they watched the room fill up with angry homeowners. I counted quickly. At least 35 of the 43 households were represented, which was unheard of for an HOA meeting. Usually, Barbara ran these things with maybe 5 people in attendance. Tom and Sarah saved me a seat near the front. Margaret Hendricks was there, along with at least a dozen other neighbors I recognized. At 7 p.m. sharp, Barbara called the meeting to order with her gavel, a ridiculous prop she had bought herself when she became president. "Thank you all for coming," she said stiffly. "I know there have been questions about the special assessment and the recreation center project. I want to assure everyone that the board has acted in the best interests of the community by trying to destroy a protected wetland." Someone called out from the back. I turned and saw it was Ron Palmer, who lived at the far end of the neighborhood. Barbara's face tightened. "The board has been advised by council that there are legal avenues to modify or challenge the conservation easement. The recreation center would be a significant amenity that would benefit all homeowners." "And cost us how much?" asked Patricia Chen, Tom's sister-in-law. $5,000 per household just for your lawyers. What about the actual construction costs?" "The special assessment covers immediate legal expenses," Dennis Morrison said, speaking up for the first time. "Additional funding would be determined once we have successfully modified the easement terms." "You cannot modify a conservation easement," I said, standing up. "That is what I have been trying to tell you. The easement is permanent. The Colorado Conservation Trust holds it, and they will never agree to development. Neither will the state or federal agencies that regulate wetlands." "Our attorney disagrees," Barbara said coldly. "Then your attorney is wrong, or you are paying him to tell you what you want to hear," I said. I held up my folder of evidence. "I have documentation here that proves the easement is ironclad. I have emails from the Conservation Trust's legal team confirming that they have never lost an easement case. And I have evidence that the HOA obtained a county permit fraudulently by misrepresenting the easement status." "That is a serious accusation," Kevin Walsh said, shifting uncomfortably. "It is a serious crime," I shot back. "The HOA applied for a development permit and was asked to provide documentation about the easement. Instead of admitting the easement prevents development, someone got a smaller permit approved for site preparation. That is fraud." "I do not appreciate your tone," Barbara said. "And I do not appreciate you trying to charge me $5,000 to pay for your illegal development scheme," I said. "This whole project needs to stop immediately. The Conservation Trust is already preparing legal action. If the HOA continues down this path, every homeowner here is going to be on the hook for massive legal bills when the trust wins, which they will." "The board has made its decision," Barbara said. "The special assessment stands." "No," Tom said, standing up beside me. "It does not. I am calling for a vote of no confidence in the current board and a motion to revoke the special assessment." "Seconded," called out at least 5 voices. Barbara looked panicked. "That is not how this works. You cannot just... Actually, according to the HOA bylaws, any homeowner can call for a vote on any matter at a properly noticed meeting," Margaret Hendricks said. She had brought her own copy of the bylaws and was reading from them. "And this was a properly noticed meeting. You sent the email to everyone. The bylaws also state that the board has authority over financial decisions," Barbara said. "Unless overridden by a majority vote of homeowners at a meeting where quorum is present," Margaret continued, still reading. "We have 35 households represented out of 43. That is well over the required 50% for quorum." Barbara looked at the other board members. Patricia Grant looked worried. Kevin Walsh was staring at his hands. Linda Foster was whispering to Dennis Morrison, who shook his head. "I am going to need a ruling from the HOA attorney," Barbara said. "The HOA attorney works for all of us, not just the board," Sarah Chen said. "And right now, we want a vote, all in favor of revoking the special assessment." Hands shot up across the room. I counted 32. "Opposed," Sarah called. Only Barbara's hand went up. The other 4 board members abstained, clearly unwilling to go down with her ship. "The motion passes," Tom said. "The special assessment is revoked." "This is out of order," Barbara sputtered. "You cannot just motion to immediately cease all activity related to the recreation center project," I said loudly, seconded. Multiple voices called. All in favor. Again, hands filled the room. 30-plus homeowners all voting to stop Barbara's project. "You are making a mistake," Barbara said, her voice shaking. "This recreation center would have been illegal," Margaret interrupted. "It would have been illegal, Barbara, and expensive, and destructive. We like our wetland. We like the wildlife. That is why we bought homes here." "I have spent months on this project," Barbara said, and for the first time I heard genuine emotion in her voice. Anger, yes, but also something else. Desperation. Months of work, negotiating with developers, working with architects, meeting with lawyers. This was going to be my legacy. "Your legacy should not be destroying protected habitat," I said more quietly. "Barbara, I know you thought you were doing something good for the community. But this was never legal. It was never possible, and pushing forward is only going to cost everyone money and time." "Our attorney said it could be done," Barbara said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "Then fire your attorney," Tom said bluntly. "Because he either lied to you or he is incompetent." The meeting continued for another hour. Several more votes were taken, including one that formally directed the board to abandon the recreation center project entirely and cooperate fully with the Colorado Conservation Trust. Another vote approved spending HOA funds to hire an independent attorney to review the board's actions and ensure no further legal liability. By the end, Barbara looked deflated. She did not even bang her gavel to adjourn. She just stood up and walked out, leaving the other board members to handle the cleanup. I stayed to talk with neighbors, sharing copies of my evidence folder and explaining what I knew about conservation easements. Multiple people thanked me for stopping the project before it got worse. Margaret gave me a hug. "You did good, Lucas," she said. "My late husband was on the board that negotiated that conservation easement 30 years ago. He would have been so angry to see someone try to undo his work." "I wish I could have met him," I said. "He did something really important." Driving home that night, I felt exhausted but satisfied. We had stopped Barbara's project, at least for now. The homeowners were on the right side of this. The Conservation Trust was involved. It was going to be okay. But the next morning I discovered just how vindictive Barbara could be. I woke to find a violation notice on my front door. According to the notice, my house was in violation of HOA rules for unpainted trim on the garage, a garden hose visible from the street, window screens that were not clean, a crack in my driveway, and landscaping that did not meet community standards. Total fines, $2,500, due immediately. I stared at the notice in disbelief. My trim was painted. It might need a touch-up in one spot, but it was not a violation. My garden hose was coiled on a hose hanger on the side of my house, barely visible and certainly compliant with the rules. My window screens were clean. The crack in my driveway was tiny and had been there when I bought the house. And my landscaping was native plants, which I had fought with the HOA about years ago and ultimately won approval for. This was retaliation, pure and simple. I took photos of everything the notice cited, clearly showing that most of the violations were either false or ridiculously petty. Then I sent an email to all 4 other board members, copying every homeowner whose email I had, explaining that I had received a retaliatory violation notice and attaching the evidence that the violations were fabricated. The response was swift. By noon, I had received emails from Dennis Morrison and Linda Foster apologizing and confirming that the violation notice was unauthorized. Barbara had not consulted the board before issuing it. At 2 p.m., I got a call from Patricia Grant. "Lucas, I want to apologize," she said. "Barbara is out of control. Dennis, Linda, and I have been discussing it, and we are planning to call for her removal as president." "What about Kevin?" I asked. "Kevin is Barbara's cousin," Patricia said. "He will support her no matter what." "But the three of us are enough to remove her with a board vote, and after last night's meeting, I think the homeowners would support it too." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I am more concerned about the conservation land. Is Barbara going to keep pushing on that?" "Not if we can stop her," Patricia said. "But I need to tell you something. I have seen some of the emails between Barbara and the attorney she hired. He is not a real estate attorney or an environmental attorney. He is a general practice guy who does mostly wills and small claims. I do not think he actually knows anything about conservation easements. He just told Barbara what she wanted to hear so he could collect fees." "That figures," I said. "Who is he?" "His name is Richard Feldman. His office is in Boulder. I am going to recommend the board fire him and hire someone actually competent to clean up this mess." True to her word, Patricia sent out a notice that afternoon calling for an emergency board meeting the following Monday to vote on removing Barbara as president and terminating the HOA's relationship with Richard Feldman. Barbara responded with an all-caps email to the entire neighborhood accusing me, Tom, Sarah, and Patricia of conspiring to undermine the HOA and threatening to sue us all for defamation. It was unhinged enough that I started to wonder if Barbara was having some kind of breakdown. This was extreme behavior even for her. The weekend passed quietly. I spent Saturday hiking in the mountains and trying to decompress. Sunday, I worked in my garden, planting early spring vegetables and enjoying the peaceful sounds from the wetland. The sandhill cranes were particularly vocal, their distinctive calls echoing across the property. Monday's board meeting was held virtually via Zoom, which was probably smart given how heated things had gotten. I was not on the board, so I could not attend, but Patricia called me afterward. "Barbara is out," she said. 3-1 vote with Kevin abstaining at the last minute. She screamed at us for 20 minutes before we finally muted her and took the vote. Then she quit Zoom and sent an email threatening to sue the HOA, the board, and you personally. "Great," I muttered. "Her threats are empty," Patricia said. "We also voted to fire Richard Feldman and hire Elizabeth Morris, who is a real environmental attorney out of Denver. She has already reviewed the conservation easement documents and confirmed what you have been saying all along. The easement is ironclad, and attempting to develop that land was never going to work." "What about the fraudulent permit?" I asked. "Elizabeth is handling that." "She has been in contact with Boulder County's legal department and the Colorado Conservation Trust. It looks like Richard Feldman told Barbara she did not need to disclose the easement to get the site preparation permit, which is just stunningly bad advice. The county is furious because they take wetland protection seriously, and they got caught issuing a permit they should never have approved." "Is anyone going to face criminal charges?" I asked. Patricia hesitated. "Elizabeth thinks Barbara and possibly Richard Feldman could face fraud charges if the district attorney decides to prosecute. The Conservation Trust is pushing for it. They want to make an example out of this case to deter other people from trying to violate easements." I did not know how to feel about that. On one hand, what Barbara had done was illegal and deserved consequences. On the other hand, the idea of my HOA president going to jail for this was surreal. "Keep me posted," I said. "I will," Patricia promised. "And Lucas, thank you." If you had not caught this early and documented everything, this could have been so much worse. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved quickly. The Colorado Conservation Trust filed a lawsuit against the Pinecrest Hills HOA and Barbara Whitmore personally, seeking a permanent injunction against any development of the easement land and requesting penalties for the attempted violation. The Boulder County District Attorney's Office announced they were investigating the permit fraud, and Barbara hired her own attorney and began sending threatening letters to various people, including me. My threatened lawsuit from Barbara accused me of harassment, defamation, interference with HOA business, and trespassing. It was 15 pages of legal nonsense that my own attorney, whom I hired after receiving the letter, described as borderline frivolous. She has no case, my attorney, Jason Reed, told me in his office in Boulder Creek. You were protecting a conservation easement, which you have every right to do as a neighbor to the protected land. You documented illegal activity and reported it to the appropriate authorities. That is not harassment or defamation, that is civic duty, and you did not trespass. The conservation land is open space that you are allowed to access. So I should not worry, I asked. I am going to send her attorney a response explaining why this lawsuit is meritless and suggesting he advise his client not to pursue it, Jason said. If she does file, we will countersue for malicious prosecution and attorney's fees. She will lose badly. Jason's letter did the trick. I never heard another word about Barbara's threatened lawsuit, but the criminal investigation was another matter. In early April, I received a call from an investigator with the Boulder County District Attorney's Office, asking if I would be willing to provide a formal statement about what I witnessed. I agreed and spent 2 hours in her office going through everything I had documented. This is one of the more clear-cut cases I have seen. The investigator, whose name was Detective Sarah Bronson, told me. We have Mrs. Whitmore's emails to the attorney asking him how to get around the conservation easement. We have the attorney's advice telling her to just apply for the site preparation permit and not mention the easement. We have the fraudulent permit application that omits required information. And we have your testimony and evidence about the surveying and attempted construction. What happens now? I asked. The DA will decide whether to file charges, Detective Bronson said. Given the amount of evidence and the seriousness of the offense, I expect he will. Fraudulently obtaining a development permit is a Class 6 felony in Colorado. Attempting to damage protected wetlands can also carry federal charges under the Clean Water Act. Federal charges, I repeated. The Army Corps of Engineers regulates wetlands, she explained. They take this stuff seriously. They have been notified about this case. I left the DA's office feeling strange. This had escalated so far beyond a neighborhood dispute. Barbara was facing potential felony charges. Her attorney might lose his license. And I was the person who had set it all in motion by looking out my window at the right time. The next HOA meeting, now with Patricia Grant as president, was held in mid-April. The agenda included an update on the legal situation and a formal vote to permanently renounce any claims to develop the conservation easement land. The vote was unanimous among the homeowners present. Even Kevin Walsh, Barbara's cousin, voted in favor. The HOA issued a formal apology to the Colorado Conservation Trust and entered into an agreement to pay for an environmental assessment of the wetland to ensure that the surveying and planning activity had not caused any damage. Fortunately, the assessment came back clean. The wetland was healthy, and the brief surveying work had not disturbed any protected species or damaged the habitat. In May, the Boulder County District Attorney filed charges against Barbara Whitmore and Richard Feldman. Barbara was charged with attempted fraud, submitting false information to obtain a permit, and conspiracy to violate environmental protection laws. Feldman was charged with conspiracy and providing fraudulent legal advice. The local news picked up the story. I gave one interview to the Boulder Daily Camera explaining the conservation easement and why it mattered. The reporter, a young woman named Kelly Torres, did a great job with the story, including photographs of the beautiful wetland and quotes from the Colorado Conservation Trust about the importance of defending conservation easements. These protections exist because someone cared enough to preserve the land for future generations, the Trust's director said in the article. When people like Lancaster stand up to defend them, they are defending not just that specific piece of land, but the entire concept of conservation for the public good. I got a few nasty phone calls and emails from people who supported Barbara or thought I was overreacting. But I got far more messages of support from neighbors, from other conservationists, and from strangers who had read the story and appreciated what I had done. Barbara's criminal trial was set for September. In the meantime, she resigned from the HOA board entirely and stopped attending any community functions. I occasionally saw her driving through the neighborhood, but she never acknowledged me. Feldman tried to negotiate a plea deal, claiming he had not understood the severity of the conservation easement restrictions. The DA was not sympathetic, especially after an investigation revealed that Feldman had provided similar bad advice to at least 2 other clients regarding protected lands. His law license was suspended pending the outcome of the criminal case and a separate ethics investigation. Summer passed peacefully. I spent a lot of time hiking and enjoying the wetland, which was thriving. The sandhill cranes successfully raised 2 chicks, which I got to watch grow from awkward fluff balls into gangly juveniles. The native wildflowers bloomed in waves of color. The chorus frogs sang every evening. In September, Barbara's trial began. I was called as a witness on the second day. The courtroom was small and not particularly dramatic, nothing like what you see on TV. Barbara sat at the defense table looking older and thinner than I remembered, her lawyer beside her. I testified about what I had witnessed, walking through the timeline of discovering the surveyors, confronting them, finding the excavation crew, and confiscating the permit. The prosecutor, an efficient woman named Amanda Cruz, walked me through my evidence methodically. Barbara's attorney tried to suggest I had overreacted and misunderstood what was happening, but the physical evidence was overwhelming. The trial lasted a week. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Barbara was sentenced to 2 years of probation, 200 hours of community service with an environmental conservation organization, and ordered to pay $50,000 in fines and restitution to the Colorado Conservation Trust for their legal expenses. Feldman received a similar sentence plus an additional year of probation and lost his law license permanently. The HOA, as an organization, was fined $25,000 by the county and required to attend training on environmental regulations and conservation easements. It was over. The following month, the Pinecrest Hills HOA held a community celebration at the wetland. Patricia worked with the Colorado Conservation Trust to install an educational kiosk near the trailhead explaining the conservation easement, the importance of wetland habitat, and the species that lived there. My name was listed on a small plaque as a community member who had helped protect the land. We had a potluck picnic, and at least 40 people showed up. Kids ran around playing while adults socialized, Someone brought a spotting scope so people could watch the sandhill cranes and other birds. Tom and Sarah brought their famous barbecue. Margaret made her apple pie. As the sun set and the chorus frogs began their evening song, I stood at the edge of the wetland watching the water shimmer in the fading light. This place was safe now, not just because of the legal protections, but because the community understood its value and was committed to defending it. "You did good, Lucas," a voice said beside me. It was Jennifer Foster from the Conservation Trust, who had come to the celebration. "I just paid attention," I said. "That is more than most people do," Jennifer said. "Conservation is not just about creating protected areas. It is about defending them when they are threatened. We need more people like you who actually care enough to fight back." "I almost did not," I admitted. When I first saw those surveyors, part of me thought about just ignoring it. It was not technically my property. It would have been easier to mind my own business. "But you did not," Jennifer said. "And because of that, this wetland will be here for another 100 years, maybe forever." I smiled. Forever was a long time, but standing there listening to the frogs sing and watching the cranes settle in for the night, it felt possible. Barbara moved out of Pinecrest Hills the following spring. I heard she relocated to Arizona to live near her daughter. I never spoke to her again, though I occasionally wondered if she understood why people had fought so hard against her project. Did she see the recreation center as genuinely beneficial and feel betrayed that others did not share her vision? Or did she know, deep down, that what she was attempting was wrong? I would never know. Some questions do not have answers. The HOA, under Patricia's leadership, became remarkably functional. We still had occasional disputes about architectural standards and lawn maintenance, but nothing compared to the Barbara years. Patricia instituted regular community meetings where homeowners could voice concerns before they became major issues. She brought in an environmental consultant to advise on landscaping standards that would support native plants and wildlife. She even organized volunteer days where residents could help maintain trails around the wetland. 2 years after the trial, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I never wanted to be on the board, but enough neighbors asked me to run that I felt obligated. My first major project was working with the Conservation Trust to create an annual wetland monitoring program where neighborhood kids could participate in counting birds, identifying plants, and learning about ecology. It became so popular that other HOAs in the area started similar programs. The wetland remained healthy. New species showed up occasionally, drawn by the protected habitat. One spring, a pair of beavers moved into the creek and built a dam, which caused some flooding on the edges of the property and required some careful management to balance beaver activity with protecting people's property. But we worked it out, consulting with wildlife experts and installing some flow devices that let the beavers keep their dam while controlling water levels. My own property thrived. The native wildflowers I had planted years ago spread and naturalized, creating a meadow that was constantly alive with butterflies and bees. I added a small pond that attracted frogs and dragonflies. I put up nest boxes that were quickly occupied by bluebirds and tree swallows. And every morning, I stood at my kitchen window with my coffee and looked out at the wetland, grateful that it was still there, still wild, still protected. Some people might think the whole ordeal was an overreaction. A lot of stress and conflict and legal drama over 20 acres of swampy land. But those people did not understand what conservation really means. It is not just about protecting pretty scenery. It is about recognizing that some places have value beyond human use, that some land should be left alone to support the other species we share this planet with, and that once you commit to protecting something, You have to follow through. The conservation easement on the Pinecrest Hills wetland was a promise made 30 years ago by someone who cared about the future. When Barbara tried to break that promise, it was not just about that specific parcel of land. It was about whether promises like that mean anything at all. I had fought to make sure they did, and I would do it again. On summer evenings, I often walked the trail that circled the wetland. I knew every turn, every viewpoint, every place where the best wildlife sightings happened. Other neighbors walked the trail too, and we would nod to each other or stop to chat about what we had seen that day. One evening in late July, 3 years after the whole ordeal began, I was walking the trail when I encountered a young couple with a toddler. They were new to the neighborhood, having just moved into the house Barbara used to own. "Is this all protected land?" the woman asked, gesturing to the wetland. "It is," I said, "permanent conservation easement." "That is wonderful," she said. "That is one of the reasons we bought here. We wanted our daughter to grow up with access to nature." The little girl was crouched by the water's edge, watching a frog with intense concentration. Her parents watched her with obvious delight. "The community takes the protection pretty seriously," I said. "We had some issues a few years ago with someone trying to develop it, but that got shut down." "We heard about that," the man said. "The previous owner, actually, our real estate agent, mentioned she had been involved in some legal trouble." "That was a difficult time," I said diplomatically. "But it worked out. The land is safe." We chatted for a few more minutes, and I told them about the monitoring program and the community events. They seemed genuinely excited to be part of a neighborhood that valued conservation. Walking home, I thought about how things had changed. The crisis with Barbara had brought the community together in unexpected ways. People who had been indifferent about the wetland had become its advocates. The HOA had transformed from an antagonistic force into a constructive part of neighborhood life. And the land itself had become not just a protected area, but a cherished community resource. None of that would have happened if I had not looked out my window at the right moment and decided to act. Sometimes I wondered what would have happened if I had been away that morning, or if I had seen the surveyors but decided it was not my problem, or if I had been intimidated by Barbara's threats and backed down. The bulldozers would have come. They would have cleared vegetation, graded the land, and begun construction before the Conservation Trust even knew what was happening. The damage would have been done, and even though Barbara would have eventually been stopped and punished, the wetland would have been scarred, possibly permanently. That alternative timeline haunted me sometimes. How close we had come to losing something irreplaceable. How easily it could have been destroyed by bureaucratic failures and one person's arrogance. But that was not what happened. The wetland was safe. The sandhill cranes were thriving. The frogs sang every night. And a little girl was learning to love nature because her parents had chosen to live in a place where conservation mattered. That was what victory looked like. Not dramatic or flashy, but quiet and enduring. The land was here. It would be here tomorrow, next year, next century. That was enough. I reached my house as the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. The evening chorus was starting, frogs and crickets and birds creating their nightly symphony. I sat on my back deck with a beer and listened, watching the light fade over the wetland. My phone buzzed with a text from Tom. "Board meeting next Tuesday. Patricia wants to discuss expanding the trail system. You in?" I texted back. "Yeah, I will be there." There was always more work to do. More ways to improve things, more threats to guard against, more opportunities to make the community better. But for tonight, I was content to sit and listen to the frogs and feel grateful for everything we had protected. The conservation easement was not just a legal document. It was a commitment that stretched across generations, a promise that this place would remain wild and beautiful long after all of us were gone. I had played my part in defending that promise. Others had helped, and someday, someone else would take up the responsibility. That was how conservation worked. Not through grand gestures or single heroes, but through ordinary people making the choice to care, to pay attention, to speak up when something wrong was happening, and to fight for what mattered. I had done that. And the wetland was still here, exactly as it should be. As darkness fell completely and the stars came out, I finished my beer and went inside. Tomorrow, I would go back to my regular life, my work, my routines. But I would also be watching, always watching, ready to defend this place if it was ever threatened again. Because that was the real lesson I had learned from the whole ordeal with Barbara and the HOA. Conservation was not a one-time fight. It was an ongoing commitment. The land was protected by law, yes, but laws only mattered if people were willing to enforce them. I was willing. My neighbors were willing. And together we would make sure this wetland remained exactly what it was meant to be. A wild place, a refuge, a promise kept. The frogs sang outside my window as I got ready for bed, their chorus a reminder that tonight, at least, all was well. Tomorrow would bring whatever it brought, but the wetland would still be there, and I would still be watching over it. That was enough. That was everything.